Alright, I have made a bunch of videos about the Metaspeed Tokyo series this year. The most recent is this one, which is my review of the Metaspeed Sky Tokyo and why I went with the Sky this year and not the Edge. I've always preferred the Edge for all the previous generations, but not this year. I've also did my initial design and technical analysis back when this shoe was announced, which is this video. Also, I did this video about how to choose which Metaspeed is right for you, both the 2025 and the 2024 version. The 2024 version goes much deeper into what I mean by low plate configuration versus high plate configuration shoes, the history of where the stride versus cadence thing comes from, all of that. The 2025 is more geared towards some of the new marketing language Asics uses in the Tokyo series and specifically for the Tokyo. So between these four videos, there's a ton of content that you can get into to get my thoughts and my reviews, my criticism of the Metaspeed series, Paris and Tokyo editions. They'll all be linked in the description. But in all of these videos, I've never answered three specific questions. And I've been seeing these in the comments come up time and time again in all four of these videos. Even the 2024 video from last year, people going back and asking what they should do based on these questions for the 2025 shoes. So I thought I'd sit down and finally answer these three questions. Which Metaspeed is right for my foot strike? Which Metaspeed is right for my distance? And what about the Metaspeed Ray? What Metaspeed is going to be right for my foot strike? Forefoot strike, midfoot strike, heel strike. Let's start with the forefoot strike because I'm a forefoot striker and I think it's the easiest one to answer. So we put both the Sky and the Edge up here. We can look at these, and I think for a forefoot striker, I'm going to say we're going to be totally fine in either one of these shoes. It really comes down to what kind of feel you're looking for. The Sky is going to give you a very bounce ride. The Edge is going to give you a very roll ride. The Sky is going to be very smooth, where the Edge is going to be somewhat rigid because the plate is directly on the ground. It really depends on what sort of ride you want here in this shoe. If we're up on our forefoot landing really around the ball of our foot, both these shoes are going to work wonderfully. And it, again, really comes down to how you want to run in the shoe and what specific feel you're looking for. Moving to the midfoot strike, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. Again, I think either one of these shoes is going to work for a midfoot striker, whether you're landing just a little bit behind the ball of your foot or truly flat as a midfoot striker. I think both these shoes are going to work. The Sky is going to give you a more dynamic and energetic ride, where the Edge is going to give you a flatter feel underfoot and it's going to give you some midfoot support. I'll come back to that in a second. I think generally speaking, for a midfoot striker, the Sky is the better option here because all of that dynamic and energetic feeling of the shoe, which is all the FF Leap foam, is something that as a midfoot striker, you're compressing all of that foam and you're getting the most out of the FF Leap foam and the most out of the shoe, and you're going to get the most resilience and energy return out of that shoe. However, I think the Edge may be the option for some midfoot strikers, especially if you need some medial support around the arch or on the inside of the heel. Not necessarily to control pronation. This is a super shoe. It's not a stability shoe. But if you need a firmer material underfoot, especially in the arch or on the medial side of the heel, that's going to be the Edge. That's going to give you a little tiny bit of support, maybe enough to get through the race that you need to get through in the shoe, where the Sky really isn't going to give you that. It's going to support the whole foot, but you're still, because it's all FF Leap foam, it's still going to be a bit more wobbly than the Edge will be. And lastly, heel strikers. Now, according to Asics, the Edge is the option for heel strikers, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think either one of these shoes will work for a heel striker. It really comes down to what type of feel you're looking for. In the Sky, it's going to be very compressive and very explosive. Again, you're really loading up all of that foam, you're compressing it in the heel, you're rolling through the midfoot, and you're exploding really off of the toe. It's a very explosive ride as a heel striker. Where in the Edge, it's going to be more stable because you're landing on the firmer FF Plus foam, but there's going to be a secondary sink in the forefoot. And that's something a lot of heel strikers do not like in low plate configuration super shoes. So what do I mean by that secondary sink? So if we take the Edge Tokyo, as you can see here, This is not unique to the Edge Tokyo. This is really any low plate configuration shoe. This goes back to Vaporflies, especially for heavy heel strikers. Here's the position of the plate in the shoe, the red line in the midsole. High in the heel, low in the forefoot. That's a low plate configuration. So when you're landing in the shoe as a heel striker, you're initially landing in this big wedge of FF Turbo Plus foam. Now, FF Turbo Plus foam is a much firmer foam, especially compared to FF Leap. And that's giving you the stability, but it can feel a little harsh. However, when you roll forward into the midfoot and off the forefoot, you're compressing the secondary foam, the FF Leap foam, which is a considerably softer foam underfoot. And this is that secondary sink. Heavy heel strikers will land on their heel, they'll compress that firmer foam, they'll roll forward, and then it's going to feel like after a slight delay, there's a secondary sink now of this secondary foam. Vaporfly runners that were heavy heel strikers would get this, but in the Vaporfly, it was all ZoomX foam. It was the same foam above the plate and below the plate. But when you mix two types of foams, particularly two foams that are different firmnesses like FF Turbo Plus and FF Leap, you're going to really accentuate that problem. So if you ran into that secondary sink in the forefoot when you transitioned off the heel in other super shoes, it's going to be exemplified a million times in the Edge Tokyo because of the differences between FF Turbo Plus and FF Leap. And if we contrast this with the Metaspeed Sky Tokyo, you can see the difference. This is the position of the plate, the red line in the midsole. This is your classic high plate configuration. The plate is very close to the foot, but when you're striking this as a heel striker, you're compressing all of the FF Leap foam. The FF Leap foam goes from the heel through the midfoot into the forefoot. There is no secondary sink because everything is now below the plate. The FF Turbo Plus foam that is in this shoe is really above the plate. I'm going to say that it's only really there to protect your foot from the carbon fiber plate and cradle your foot just a little bit around the plate to give you, again, a firmer, more stable platform under the foot onto the plate to really compress all that FF Leap foam, all that super soft foam. So as a heel striker, yes, you are going to get some more instability, some wobbliness in that initial strike in the FF Leap, but you're going to get a much more dynamic and much smoother transition from heel to toe in this Sky Tokyo because of the configuration of these two foams. The next question I'm seeing a lot, and this is a holdover from last year in the Paris series, is which Metaspeed is right for my race distance? Now last year with the Paris series, there was kind of an answer to this. A lot of people favored the Edge for shorter distances because it was a little bit more harsh on the body, specifically for 5K, 10K, maybe up to the half marathon. And then from the half marathon to the full marathon, people were generally preferring the Sky for that because there was a little bit more cushion. Now, the Paris series was all FF Turbo Plus foam, which is a harsher, more rigid, stiffer foam than FF Leap, and I could see where there was a preference here for the distance in which you was going to kind of beat your feet up less based on the distances. However, this year in the Tokyo series, I think it's a bit of a moot point with the introduction of FF Leap foam. Now, all of the Metaspeeds are designed for really any road racing distance. There isn't one that's for short, one that's for long. They're both intended for the same, and they basically have the same performance across the same distances, which is kind of remarkable given that Asics always designs two shoes in their Super Shoe series that basically perform the same. They just have a very different ride. And that's going to be my answer here. Pick whichever one is going to be more comfortable for you and allow you to perform best in that race. Seems like a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think it's true. There isn't one that's intended for long or short distances. Just go with the one that's more comfortable here, and you're going to do fine in your race distance with either one. And the last question is, what about the Metaspeed Ray? When should I consider the Metaspeed Ray, or should I consider the Metaspeed Ray at all? And my answer to this is it really depends. Now, when the Metaspeed Ray released here in Taiwan about a week ago, I went and tried it on, and I was stunned with how soft the midsole foam in that shoe is. It is the same FF Leap foam that's in the Sky and Edge, but I do think it's a little bit softer, and you really notice that. It is one of the most compressive shoes I have ever put on my foot, even more so than the Saucony Endorphin Elite 2, which I tried on last fall. Now, my answer to should you consider the Metaspeed Ray is this. You need to be a very lightweight runner, and I'm talking under 60 kilos or about 100, 135 pounds. You need to have very efficient form. You need to be very light on your feet. And this is really important because some runners are they clod around. They're just really heavy runners. But if you look at a good marathoner and it looks like they're kind of floating down the road, those are runners that are very light on their feet. I think you need to be that for this shoe. And most importantly, I think you need to be a forefoot striker to even consider racing in the Metaspeed Ray. And the rest of the midsole that's in this shoe is really just there to help support the foot as form breaks down, which it does for any runner, including elites, but it's really intended for that very efficient, clean forefoot strike. Because the Metaspeed Ray actually doesn't have a carbon fiber plate in it. It has this, which I think Kofuzi described as a forefoot shank, which I think is the best way of describing what this actually is. It's just a little piece of carbon fiber that's under the ball of the foot that goes down the lateral side into the midfoot just a little bit. It's really just there to give a platform for the ball of the foot as you're forefoot striking to compress the FF Leap foam and explode off that foam. Same concept from an engineering standpoint as the Metaspeed Sky. However, it's just pushed about as far as you possibly can. Asics Engineering really pushed the concept of the Sky and they made the Ray. Now, last spring in the World Major Marathon season, we didn't see any Asics Elite or Pro race in the Metaspeed Ray. But last spring, the shoe was still a prototype. It was still early. It was still being tested. So I understand why it wasn't raced in the spring World Major Marathon season. However, we are now entering the fall 2025 World Major Marathon season. The first race, which will be Sydney, will be in about a week from this video. And we should see one or two Asics athletes racing in the Metaspeed Ray if we're going to see it at all. Because now they've had a full build to actually train in the Metaspeed Ray or determine is that the right shoe for them. So if we're going to see any Asics Elite or Pro racing in the Ray, we're going to see it this fall. And that will give us our answer as to what the Ray actually is. Is it a legitimate race shoe, or is it more of an engineering experiment meant to push the concept of the Sky to the nth degree? Because this shoe is so extreme, it's not a shoe I think I'm going to invest in. I didn't purchase it. I don't think I'm going to purchase it. It's just not a shoe that's worth the investment for me to go in and sort of test. I'm definitely not going to race that shoe. So Asics, if you're watching this video, I am curious to run in that shoe and really test it and really see if I can beat it up. But again, not enough that I'm actually going to invest in it. So reach out to me. There's an email in the description. We'll talk. I am curious about this shoe, but otherwise, I think for most runners, you're going to be better off in the Sky. If you want the concept of the Sky and really compressing all of that FF Leap foam, I think 99.9% of runners are going to be better off in the Sky Tokyo, and I think most people are going to leave it at that. So there you go. I do not know how much more literal I can be to answer those three questions because they keep coming up, but that's probably the end of my Metaspeed Tokyo content for a bit. This shoe, the Metaspeed Sky, will actually appear in some data videos this fall as I really look at the analytics and the data that I get in this shoe and compare it to some other super shoes, especially as I determine what shoe I'll race in this December. I'm actually racing a half marathon this December. I got my entry to that. I don't think this is going to be the shoe, but again, I'm going to let the data dictate that. And I'm really curious how this holds up to some of the other key super shoes of 2025. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you want to support what I do here, check out sagasuRunning.com for merch or click the join button below. If neither one of those options are good for you, leave a comment, leave a like, because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.